trying to link up to the UN summit in 2014 in September, coming with a report. I'm sure many of you heard about the high-level report that David Cameron and Liberia's President Ellen Johnson and Indonesia's President, which name I can't pronounce, sorry, that came out about a year ago. And this is, you could say, the next movement. It has 17 targets right now, and the fourth one of them is education. And if you look at the wording, I'm sure you've read it now, it again talks quite strongly about that it has knowledge and skills in education curricula and training programs. It has a different connotation, but it talks about sustainable development and awareness program, awareness raising of culture. So I think it's not the same wording. It talks a little bit more about training, only has knowledge and skills. But we've been pushing very hard. I am part of where I'm sitting in trying to push government in this open working group to the wording that comes in here. And just for you to know, what our policy advisor at the Global Campaign, I asked her to correct, because my English is not always correct, and I asked her to correct my PowerPoint to make sure there weren't no mistakes. And she said, when she sent it back to me, and I want to correct some of these wordings because your English is better than some of the people who is actually putting these words out. So I thought that was quite a funny comment. But maybe we haven't gone there yet, and we still don't know where they will go in the next year. But I do think we are getting to something which is far and much less in the Millennium Development, as said, education for all. This is just to show you, you can go to Global Campaign for Education's homepage. We have made our position paper about the future goals. If I say what we have come up with, and I have to say, we're a movement in 100 countries, many NGOs, many international NGOs, many coalitions in countries with small NGOs. It's really civil society around the world. So this is a compromise, and it is what people has feeded into. It is a process of people from around the world, and the way we have phrased it is, quality education is very important for us and teachers. We have a very strong focus on what, the education of teachers is very important. And then we talk about that the necessity to become so here it's not knowledge, values, and skills. At least values is in ours. And we talk about, which I think is one of the important paragraphs for us, is that the post-2015 education goal must include concrete steps to overcome all forms of discrimination. And that's from disability, gender, race, ethnicity, religion, language, sexual orientation, and socioeconomic status. All children need access to equitable and good quality education. These are the things that we push for when we push in each of our countries, our government's decision. Just at the end of nobody's telling me 2 minutes, so if I'm too long, please let me know. I just want to give you an example from Denmark, because I am the head of the Global Campaign in Denmark, and we have for more than 10 years produced global campaign or global education material that goes out to schools. And it's not that we produce the books and they're lying on a shelf. It's actually 8,300 teachers that each year sign in to be part of the campaign. Global Campaign has an action week each year, and my German colleagues, the Moxfam that I hear as well, are part of the campaign too, and has each year, we will have, maybe there are others here, we will have this Global Action Week where we give children the chance to have a voice. This is in practice acting. And for us, it's been very important that it's linked to the curriculum. And you heard the UNESCO General Secretary from Denmark speak earlier today. We try to work in cooperation with the government to ensure that the curriculum has global citizenships in it. And it's a fight in the Danish society, which has 200 years of free education celebrating this year. We have quite a numbers who only wants to talk nationally and not globally. When I say globally, I mean intercultural understanding. So this is the campaign, and I'm showing you pictures. And for us, it is very important to link the right to education and education for global citizenships. So as a child, being lucky born in Denmark where everything comes free, I have to understand that this is not the freedom for everybody in this world. And for you to understand that, that to me is global citizenship itself. And the pictures of the woman, she's called my name, that's the Danish Prime Minister. She sent 1,000 balloons to the air, trying to symbolize that this is what we want. We want good quality education where we educate citizens. And I think that is about it. So thank you very much. Yeah. Maybe I just would like 3 people. You can raise your hand if you have one word, just one. You can only say one word. We don't have time for questions. One word that comes to your mind. Yes?
Discrimination.
Discrimination. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. One more?
Schools.
Schools. Thank you very much. Now it's my job to introduce. So how do we measure all of this? What do we do? And Abby is from UNESCO as well. And she comes from the Department of Teaching and Learning Content. So we'd like to hear, so how can we measure this? Did I say it wrong? No? Okay. 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 It's an acronym for it. Okay. Maybe you can say it. But we look very much forward to hear how is your view on education for global citizenships and how do you think we can actually monitor it? Welcome, Abby.
And thank you so much. I had a moment there of needing to ask Lydia. We just changed the name of our division, and so I wanted to make sure that I had it right. So I'm going to ask a quick question before we start, and you won't hurt my feelings how you answer this question, but raise your hand if you see measurement on the agenda and you feel happy and excited. Yay, there are a few of you out there. That's great. So I'm actually trained as a developmental psychologist, and my area in UNESCO typically is early childhood. And at the same time, I spend a lot of time on measurement. So what I'm going to do today is give you an overview of what's happening on the measurement side, particularly around the post-2015 discussion, and then how that might be useful for your work. And two, I'll call it GCE only because that's what I put in my PowerPoint and then promised to change it. Okay, so in particular, I'm going to be talking about the Learning Metrics Task Force in post-2015. And the Learning Metrics Task Force was an effort that was orchestrated by UNESCO Institute for Statistics and the Brookings Institution, pulled together a lot of people to say, what should we focus on measuring? And so then at the same time, the post-2015 conversation started happening, and I just wanted to highlight some of the shifts that have happened since this process began in Dakar. So first, the indicators were focused on inputs as the means to desirable results. Then there was a focus on outputs. For example, completion would be an output. And now that we're getting to post-2015, we're focused on outcomes. So it's a bit of a developmental process within the measurement and indicator world too. So the key around post-2015 now is that it's going to require a lot of new indicators. And it's important to recognize then exactly what is involved in developing new indicators and how long it's going to take and the resources that are required to produce the data that people want for tracking. So this is just a reminder of what Learning Metrics Task Force put forward. You can see that there's a lot of emphasis on basic academic skills, meaning reading and numeracy, and that then also ready to learn is the area that I work on, citizen of the world being one that you may be interested in. And here's another depiction of how the various domains play out across all ages. I think that what's critical to keep in mind too is that the concept then really across all of the ages. I'm listening to that. that, for people like me, focused on the measurement side, then I look at the constructs and I look at the ideas behind it, and then I say, okay, how can I translate this into measurement? What would need to happen? This is what I see, and it's great for me to be here and hear it from you directly. That it's a set of complex competencies. It has a lot of different pieces to it. It's a mix of knowledge and skills and attitudes, and therefore it is not quite the same as other forms of measurement. So that standardized formats in particular are the ones that are easiest in terms of global tracking. There's no question about that. And that it may require, I think probably there, you can tell me whether or not you agree, a range of different methods, so that then it probably won't feel sufficient to have one measurement method then that suffices for all of the different pieces that are involved in this construct. Okay, so given that, how do we get to measurement? And so what I've done here is outline some of the steps that we see. So that first, you have to decide whether the concept is clearly defined. Do you have a shared sense of what you should be focused on? Then the second question being, what type of measurement currently exists? One of the top questions for post-2015 is, to what extent do you feel that it's appropriate to measure in a way that's globally comparable? So I think that either a yes or a no to that question would be an acceptable answer. For anything that is going to end up being part of the global agenda, there will be a push on measurement. And that push on measurement will probably require some degree of global comparability, because that's the way that the dialogue goes. And I think that there are a lot of technical reasons why that's true. Some of it has to do with the consumption of data, but it is kind of one of the realities. And so then as a community, it's important to have some sort of consensus about how you feel about that and how you think it should be handled. Then the next point, which I think has come up in a lot of the other talks too, is there a theory of change? Do you have a sense of how the changes that you want to see in education will be achieved? In an ideal world, you have indicators along each step of the way that help you take account of whether those changes are happening. So you'd have input variables of, for example, is there explicit reference to the concepts in a national curriculum, yes or no? And then output variables of the percentage of teachers who use that curriculum on a regular basis, and then to outcomes, there are noticeable changes in the way that students are educated, leading them to have the skills and competencies you want. Finally, then, there's a question of how the data will be used. And here, it's not just a question of tracking in terms of the global, but I would also say that there's an important question of where do you see the blocks in the system, which came up in the first talk today, too, of where are the barriers and how is information useful against those barriers. So if you take a look at where things are, so for early childhood, for example, we have huge problems with quality and access. So that then getting information about quality and access is really, really critical to measuring outcomes. And arguably, it doesn't even make sense to measure outcomes until we're clear that the other pieces of the theory of change are covered. So you can break it down into those pieces and say, what's a reasonable goal for us in terms of achieving the change, and how can we measure that? This is a very complicated slide, but it'll be here for your reference. I'm sorry that it's so small. It basically just walks through those steps and then has questions on the side that, that you can address that help stimulate the thinking to get to an idea of measurement. So I just wanted to add a few words to what Lydia mentioned earlier about where UNESCO is in this process. That we've started to define the teaching and learning outcomes, the content that Lydia mentioned, and that then being very clear that measurement follows from that. At the same time, there's huge advocacy opportunities right now, and a big push to try to make sure that that some of these ideas are part of the post-2015 agenda. So it's a bit of a tension of how do we go ahead and try to move forward on the measurement, knowing that the basis of the measurement of what we really want to see happen in classrooms and schools and school systems is still sort of in the process of being defined. So from that, then, we will be reviewing the existing sources of measurement, identifying the possibilities. I think one thing that's important to note is that it may not be okay. That's just what it is. Like it also is potentially very worthwhile to outline a process to get to the indicators, and then to acknowledge that each of these areas of early childhood being an example again, it's not as well developed as reading and numeracy. So it's a harder sell, and it's just the way it is. At the same time, to have measurement drive doesn't make sense either. So it's important to find the balance there. And I think that then going back to the points that I raised earlier in terms of the most important things to consider, it has to do with the degree of comparability and the trade-offs with a one-size-fits-all approach that is very useful and is arguably very strong advocacy measures on a global level versus saying the extent to which things really need to vary on a national level. And so I think that, I would recommend lingering on that question, because once indicators are built into systems, they can be really quite difficult to change. So it's important to make sure that you feel okay about that. Then the next question is how close existing measures come to fully capturing the concept. So that if you can identify a few measures. So for example, IEA has some citizenship questions in one of their surveys of really taking a close look at those questions and saying, if these are the indicators that we use, does it cover 5% of the concept that we feel is important? Is it 50%? Is it 80%? You never quite get to 100, but there are different pieces of data that will take you a certain amount of distance. And I think that these types of questions, as a community, it's very important that there's a process for you to be able to discuss them. Finally then, is that there really are a lot of different ways to structure indicators. I would recommend too, just on the basis of the work that we're doing in other areas, that qualitative indicators are a possibility and process indicators are also a possibility, so that if it feels premature to say, for example, that we've got one measure that will be useful on knowledge of environmental change, that it also can be possible to recommend tracking the number of countries that have it in their curriculum, with the number of classrooms that are integrating things along those lines, that then again are much more about the impact. So in the context of that then, despite the various, I would say, I guess in some ways I would say challenges around the complexity of the construct that you're dealing with, I think that there are a lot of opportunities and a lot of ways forward. And that one of the keys then is just making sure that you as a community feel good about how you're addressing the measurement questions, and then those of us on the measurement side can do our best to make sure that the data that come from it is high quality and is what you want. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Abby. Very interesting. Interesting to see how measurement might change over time. I'd like you to raise your hand and tell me, have you in any of the education you've gone through ever been measured in knowledge that you had learned? Skills? Values? Oh, notice. Very few of you say that you've actually been measured in the values that came out of the education that you learned. Interesting. Okay? Well, maybe we need to change that. We have now 4 speakers that all together will talk, and they all come from beyond 2015. I am sure that they will present themselves from the work that they are doing. I can just say that the way I know Beyond is they're a very big player in trying to push in the social movement of the new goals. So we look very much forward to, and I think I will introduce all 4 of you, and you go from time to time. We have decided 5 minutes to each of you. So it's Doreen. It will be Doreen first. And then it will be Saru, it will be Nicholas, and it will be JoJo. So please welcome Doreen, who comes from beyond 2015, who is one of the big players in trying to get new goals.
Doreen Wandera is my name, coming from Uganda, East Africa, and heading the 2015 campaign in Africa. I will speak from the heart regarding issues of education. I did not prepare any presentation. I will speak as an African, I will speak as a woman, and I will speak as a citizen, global citizen at that. In Africa, when a woman is born, they see cows coming from a dowry, they see whales coming when she's married off, they see children. You are supporting Africa, and you are perhaps working there. Looking at the theme of today, Citizen for Global Education. What ran in my mind first? I was expecting to, when I read Citizen for Global Education, I expect to see equality, inclusion, and equity. And these are far-fetched for a woman in that context. And therefore my question is, are women part of the citizens in Africa? This is for you to answer as we plan. The other question is somebody accountable for all the school dropouts of girls for very simple, silly, preventable reasons? Is somebody accountable as we talk about citizens for global education? Where are the women who are the biggest in terms of population and they're the least educated? We move on. We are saying education for global citizens. The other question is, how prepared are we amidst poverty, having the woman most vulnerable to poverty and the poorest in Africa? How prepared are we to drive the agenda of education for global citizens? It's a challenge to you all, me inclusive. Inequality, this is self-defined. Insecurity in Africa, I don't have to talk about it. You are all aware what is happening in Nigeria, how the girls were taken from school. In an attempt, these girls were schooled in an attempt to have education. But here they are, hijacked and taken away, not yet found. In Uganda, we lost very many girls in school. The Aboke girls is a very known scenario in Uganda, in the northern part of Uganda. They were taken only to surface after 20 years with children who are fatherless. And we are saying education for global citizens. The politics of divide and rule in Africa, you all know it. The girls are dropping out of school for a number of reasons. Some I said are silly. Managing menstrual hygiene, that's the area I'm working in. I'm working in the water and sanitation sector. And we have data that the girls drop out of school because they have no places to change sanitary wear. They have nowhere to put their wastes. And they have nowhere, they have no water to wash and clean themselves. They drop out. Just that, a natural process. How prepared are we? Women in conflict, we've all seen it. Lack of information. Information in Africa is more or less luxury. Among the minority few who would like to get education and perhaps a little informed, at least I'm one behind. How prepared are we? As I conclude, the current curriculum does not teach a woman any values, does not teach values of multitasking as a woman professional, as a mother, as a worker. It doesn't do that. The curriculum doesn't give leadership skills and self-mastery. I thank you all. We need to get solutions to this as we think of the theme, and women have to be included in the theme. Thank you.
Very good afternoon. And I feel sleepy because Cambodia time is already time for sleeping. But because it's very important even today, and I would like to express my sincere thanks to the organizers for having me here today. I have prepared the slide presentation by consulting with the numbers of countries in Asia. But because of the time and because of today's reflections coming to the guest speaker in the morning, so I decided not to present as a slide presentations. But just to come up with, to remind all of us that we don't want to have the global commitment to make everyone happy, like education for all and all for education in the current MDGs goals. We very much appreciate that goals, actually. But almost 15 years, the results of today coming with conflicts, internal conflicts, wars, poverty, inequalities, or exclusions, maybe because of the approach or the means of the implementation of the global commitment. We learned that from Asia, talking only about India and China already represent more than half of the global populations. And most of the poor people are in this country. And if you're looking at the global report, 57 million children could not access to the school because numbers of reasons, including poor governance in education system, poor accessibility to education services and facilities, and also poor in terms of social and economical support to the children. And they are the future of our world. So we need to have a quality of education. We need to have a very good means of implementation and approach that can enable all people at the ground, children, disabilities, girls, women, and minorities, to assess all the global commitments. I can guess the new global frameworks or the new global goals will also make everyone happy. But the question is that how that end goal, the end, can be delivered. So there is a need to look at the mean and the process. It's matters of ownership and accountability, especially at the ground level. How can the education system to educate people individually and institution to own the end results and to own the fates of all of us in the future? So the point I would like to conclude, we should not just talk about what we want to get by end of 2030. But we need also to look at the way that can motivate, that can enable people from different status of society to get equal benefits from the education system. I learned from the speaker that what is possible. To me, personally, see that if we have a proper and quality education system, as well as good approach for education, then nothing is impossible. Even the word impossible itself recognizes I am possible. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Nicola. I come from Chile. I'm the regional coordinator for Latin America for the Beyond 2015 campaign. And I work at the regional platform, NGO platform for Latin America. That is called Mesa de Articulación. So I wanted to, I'm really not a specialist on this subject, so please bear with me. And it's really likely that I really oversimplified things. But, so the first thing I wanted to say is that in Latin America, the concept of civic education goes back to the moment where most countries reached their independence in the 1800s, where the concept of educación popular was developed, and it was a way to fulfill the need for the newborn republics to build a political identity and contribute to the formation of citizens. And it implied civic education about territorial integrity, the concept of territorial integrity, the working of institutions, and but it was just based on the transfer of knowledge, obviously. Then we can say that the concept of citizen evolved with the political systems that were in place at certain times. As you may know, from the mid-50s to the beginning of the 1980s, most Latin American countries were ruled by authoritarian or regimes or dictatorships. So this influenced the way civic education was imparted in the school. And the concept of citizen, obviously, it was very reduced, and again, just focused on the formation of citizens in the way the authorities wanted them to be formed. So there was a focus on procedural aspects, and this led to a paradox, because there are studies that show that in the countries that where public education was widespread and civic education was really implemented, those were the countries where actually the most cruel and dictatorships were installed. So it can be seen as a cautionary tale about the way we focus civic education. That's cool, because if you focus only on the procedural aspects and the concept of territorial integrity and all that, which was the focus back then, it can lead to those kind of regimes, although obviously it's not the only variable to play. And then in the 80s and 90s, there was a process of democratic transitions in most countries. And then civic and human rights were recovered, and a new concept of citizenship was. So we can talk from this moment on about the democratic culture. but mostly through informal means. Formal education continued to be focused on normal, traditional civic education, and this led to increased dissatisfaction with procedural democracy. The citizens became very critical about representative democracy, being very limited and all that. And if we add that to the globalization process and the environmental considerations, we can say that in this society, in the Latin American society, there's a increasing awareness about all this. But there are several challenges, mainly the fact that both the education systems and the society in Latin America are very unequal. There's from the politics of structural adjustments that were put in place in the 80s by the dictatorships, many dictatorships. Public funding for education was really reduced, and public education was only for the most poor and vulnerable education that led to broadly reproduce the deeply rooted social inequalities that were already in place in most countries. So there aren't really public policies about global citizen education, and when there are really small projects, very isolated, and many carried out by NGOs and private educational foundations. There are in Colombia, there are a program which is called Peaceful Classrooms, which deals with conflict management and resolution. That has been very successful, and in Chile, my home country, there are small programs about the sensibilization about the situation of migrants that convey respect for them. And also there are economic considerations, because educational system in most countries are seen as a way to repair labor instead of really building fluent citizens. But there are also opportunities, and especially, as I said, through informal means, there's an increased recognition of the need to develop democratic skills and attitude, and not only transfer of knowledge. And there's very important, there's a concept of buen vivir that it can be translated to well-being, always more broad than that. And it's basically satisfying human needs in harmony with nature. And in that, there's a very important concept that is seeing nature as a subject of rights, and that, I think, is a very important factor, concept that should be conveyed in Latin America, and could be Latin American contribution to global citizen education. And obviously, in the post-NDG framework, this would be a really good way to gain momentum and to develop a more holistic view on this matter in Latin America and the world. Okay. Thank you.
Bulavinaka, Talofa, and Malolele from the Pacific Islands. I'm Chochi Patiaki. We are the regional coordinators for the Beyond 2015 campaign in the Pacific. In particular, just before I start, I'll try and go through my slides very, very quickly. I promise I have only 5 slides that are substantive to today's discussions. Maybe you can use it into your contributions in the later discussions today. But when the Beyond 2015 campaign was brought together, there were 7 global values that were identified, and 2 of those was substantively contributed from the Pacific region. And also, in light of that too, through this campaign, the Pacific is really, really excited, and we're really, we're excited because in not many cases, like before in global campaigns, the Pacific has now detached from the Asia-Pacific tag. as a region, because we've always struggled with putting our issues through with our fragmented islands in the South Pacific Ocean. So this is my organization, PIANGO, Pacific Islands Association for Non-Governmental Organizations, and we work with umbrella NGOs throughout the Pacific. On our logo, you will see that's a conch shell, which is usually blown, and it symbolizes communication and summons the people of the islands. It's widely used in the Pacific. Summons the people of the island to a gathering or a particular place, and in some of those occasions, it's education. The circular sand drawing reflects spiritual unity and oneness within the islands. Though we are many islands, we are one, and we come together with a very strong essence to our spirituality. Now, this is just a very, for those of you who are not sure, I've had 4 people ask me, Fiji, where from? Close to which country or which continent? Okay, so this is very briefly, we're close to Australia and New Zealand, if you've heard of those two places. We're somewhere here. But these are all the other islands that we work with. And belong to the Pacific region. So you can see that we struggle with, in terms of communication, the remoteness of the islands, very difficult accessibility to information, and the speed of things to establish an education system that's good, that's running, that's globally conducive as well, can be very difficult to set up in islands that are scattered like this and are very fragmented in the South Pacific Ocean. That's to give you a bit of background of where we're coming from. This is just a list of the network. We can talk about this through coffee or lunch or dinner. We'd like to call ourselves the liquid continent. Though we are little in land mass, we're huge in the ocean. I had no right. I wanted to grab an image, a PDF image that has all of the continents of the world fitted into the Pacific Ocean, and yet there was still space. So that's why we like to call ourselves the liquid continent. But I have, through copyright issues, I couldn't grab hold of that particular image. It's an image that belongs to the Pacific Conference of Churches. I would have wanted to bring that, but that's just to tell you that, hey, we also matter. We're from the Pacific. We're small in landmass, but our biggest asset is the ocean, and we hope that that can get through. Okay, in the current MDGs, education for all, most of the countries have achieved this goal, but to a certain extent. And you know, this is only because this is we're small populations in the Pacific. So there's what I need to say by this. If you look to the next few bullet points here, I'm rushing in my brains here because I know I only have a few minutes. What I mean by that is education for all. Yes, we've achieved it. Most of the islands have achieved it in trying to keep in line with the global education process. And we've enrolled as many kids as we could through the primary level, early childhood, but when it comes to graduation, when it comes to the end result, there's some loopholes there. Not everybody graduates, and it affects the ratio of women, of gender, graduating from schools in terms of equality in the workplaces. I think it really starts from that level too. So that's what we're trying to say here. So we're questioning the retention, you know, that it won't affect the completion rate, and all that. And then at the bottom there, you'll see a high rate of dropouts or pushouts. What we mean by that is, I think these two, you can say that one is institutionally caused and one is individually caused, but I think it's interrelated, or vice versa. How can I put it more clearly? Because if the individual is affected and probably finding it hard to get through the currently set up education system that's in place, you get the chain reaction, if you get my drift this afternoon. So that's what we're trying to say here. So it's really the end. Like I mentioned earlier on, you remember the conch shell? We in the Pacific Islands, furthermore, just to give you enlightenment to that background, we are very communal islands. We come together. We work better as a community. We work better in numbers. So coming together is very key to the unity and has been the basis of our resilience as a region on global issues. That's been the fundamental basis of everything for us in the Pacific. So when we look at the formal and the non-formal education, the formal education has definitely delivered and has had its place in terms of education, advancing education, bringing through the global agenda with as far as education is concerned. But the non-formal, for those that do not go to school, we have the elderlies, we have the disabled, the disabled community in terms of education. In the Pacific, a long way to go, a long way to go. We come here, we come to big places, and we see the inclusiveness in just the very physical setup of the facilities around you, the public service, the public amenities is very much way ahead of us. And that's something we'd like to push through in the Pacific, is the non-formal aspect of learning. So that's what really we're trying to say here. And that's what we're trying to look at as well through the Beyond 2015 campaign, is the non-formal side of education, and seeing how that can fit into the global citizenship for education. I'm seeing if I've missed anything. All right, we'll move to the next slide. Half a minute. She's very generous. Thank you, Madam Chair. So yes, we're saying that while access to and the quality of education is important in the formal system, non-formal education is more relevant for us in the Pacific Islands, as I've just mentioned. Our current system has paid a lot of attention to the formal education, but on the other hand, given our realities, given that we're small island nations, and given that we've lived as communal people for the past 100,000 million years, we're saying that there's a system, there's a structure that's already in place. All we need is the support to make that work, so that the non-informed, the non-formal side of education can come up to pass, so that we can be on the global agenda as well on both sides, formally, non-formally as well. That's what we're trying to say here. I think that's it. Yeah, and what we need is resourcing, programming, support, guidance, and we look to working with UNESCO on these sorts of things. Thank you very much. We look forward to chatting with you throughout the day.
Thank you very much. I think the last 4 speakers sent us around the world, and it was very reflective, and I think really fantastic. I got some Twitter questions here, but I'm going to give you 20 seconds just to reflect on, if you had a chance to give your questions, what would your questions be? Just write it down, your question for yourself. You know, we're being live streamed, and maybe they wonder why we have silence for 20 seconds. Maybe we could celebrate Nelson Mandela at the same time, which I think we could. I will take the 3 questions that were on Twitter while we were having the panel, the presentations, and then I think we'll try and have at least 3 from the audience who didn't tweet anything, and then it will be around the lunch break. I wish we'd had a little more time, but it's always difficult when you have so many panelists. The first question that has come up, and it's to you, Hela. The question is, why is there a globally military budget that is 440 times the budget of UNESCO? I think if you take the microphone there, difficult question.
I'm not sure that I can really answer that, but I think it's really at the heart of what we're dealing with here, because it's very interesting that we speak about certain things, but we don't speak about other things. So if you look at the documents that came out of the World Summit on Sustainable Development, for example, there's nothing written there about militarism or ending militarism. There's nothing in that document about transnational corporations and how they function. And yet we've had a whole decade of education for sustainable development, when the very documents that were the foundation documents for that have these silences. So I think it's very important for us to, as I said in my talk, to really look carefully at, what are the critical questions that we need to ask, so that we don't end up with the paradoxes which my colleague over there from Chile raised. Yeah, and it's a good question, why is it that we spend so much more money on weapons than we do on children? What's going on? How do we change that? This is what this kind of education is really all about, I think. But I don't think that we can really make those changes unless we are very serious about what we're talking about. So I think that's the best way that I can answer that.
We have 57 million approximately children who don't access school. We talk about 250 million children and young people and adults who don't even if some of them have gone to school, they haven't learned anything. And we have about 30 to 35% who are somehow not included for a handicap and so, and 42 million of the children of the 57 children that are not at school are actually south of Sahara, sub-Sahara countries. So it's 9 out of 10 children that are in school. What are they actually at the end learning? And why is it in some places that they are not in school? I think these are some of the big questions for global citizens as well. The next question is, how globally comparable should measurements be? I think you can imagine, Abby, that's a question for you. How globally comparable should measurements, or should they be? You could ask, should they be contextualized?
I think that it really, I would turn that question back to you. Weighing the pros and cons of having something that's globally comparable. There would satisfy the need for some degree of comparability, but not being perfectly comparable. So there are some technical corners that one can turn. However, I think that my understanding of this concept is that there should be some degree of flexibility to respond to local context, not like deeply embedded within the construct. And so I think that that's why I would say that's an important question for you as a community to weigh in on. That by having something be globally comparable, you lose a lot of the richness that comes from context. If you have something that's contextually dependent, you have a hard time doing global comparisons. And so that then it would just be a question of placing yourself on that spectrum and deciding how you want to use the data, where you think it's most valuable.
Goes off. Thank you very much for your answer. The next one is quite linked, and I would ask Beyond to answer this one. Is the challenge not that when we measure, it is suggested as hard quantity in the way we understand the outcome? Not so much quality, but quantity. Anybody from Beyond who would like to answer that question? Doreen, you don't get the question. It's difficult when it's Twitter. It's saying, is one of the challenges the word measurement? It's like a quantity way of understanding measurement. It's not so much quality of what we have learned. Doreen, would you like to go for that one and try?
Yeah, I'll give it an attempt. Yes, quite often we measure by quantity, not qualities. For example, in governance, I'll take Uganda in particular. They say women participation, and the rule is a quarter of the parliament, Senate committees must be women. It doesn't define the quality of women. So they end up being passive participants, but the numbers are right, not the quality. So, and same thing to education. School enrollment, hundreds have registered. But the quality of education they are getting from there is not anywhere measurable. So it is true, our indicators are towards numbers, not quality, and shall keep harvesting a raw deal in education unless we think of quality.
Thank you very much. I'd like to open the floor for 3 questions. Yeah.
I think my first question goes to Professor Ross from South Africa, and I think you quite pointed out the issue of we shouldn't underestimate the players here. I'm asking civil society players. We have talked about governments, we have talked about our role in promoting success for global education. Are there other players that we are not including here? Because we shouldn't underrate the relationship between government, business, and education.
I think we're going to take 3 questions and then we'll have answers. I have a question up here. Yes, please.
Thanks. My name is Eddie O'Loughlin. I'm a coordinator with GEAN, Global Education Network Europe, and we bring together ministries and agencies to share policy learning in global education. It's more a general question or point to the panel, and I feel it's something that there will obviously be further reflection on in the workshops. But I just wanted to raise the question of the term education for global citizenship, and I'd have some practical concerns around it, especially in the light of all of us having limited resources, the possibilities of confusion developing, and maybe some risks around ignoring some of the progress and credibility to date that has been built up. For example, through the term global education. And many of you will probably be aware of how the term global education really was cemented about 12 years ago at a Congress in Maastricht in the Netherlands, where over 50 countries participated. And one of the key outputs was this umbrella term global education. Keep it short. As I said, it's something that I think should be looked at seriously in the workshops. It's been mentioned several times this morning, interesting new buzzword, and I think a lot of good intentions, probably some good can come of this, but I think we need to remember the progress to date and the work to date. Thank you.
When we get to that question, I'm asking here to respond to it. I have one in the future back, and that's the last one before. That's you. Yeah.
Hi there. The context of my question is at the moment I'm working on the impact of the Global Learning Programme in the UK, and I was really interested for Abby to talk a little bit more about the mix in the range of skills and abilities that you're measuring in your framework, and I wondered if there's a tendency that we are shying away from the more complex things such as values and attitudes, how that's going to balance out.
Okay, thank you. Hela first.
I think that these issues need to involve everybody in society, and we tend to frame our society in the name or in the kind of stakeholder clusters. But probably, I think we need to be looking more at, what are the configurations of relational dynamics, so that we cover the full terrain. So I think your point is an important one. Who is involved in these discussions about the kind of citizenship that we want internationally or globally. Yeah, and at what levels, because the concept of global is also quite like, global, it's quite big and out there. And what's the relationship between that and these local configurations and the sort of more multi-layered configurations of players? And it's quite a complex issue because we know that control say, for example, of key industries or so on, is not always locally based. It's crossing the planet, and sometimes you can't find them because there's so many layers, and it's all kind of hidden. Then it becomes government becomes the main person or group that you can kind of target. So I think it needs a lot more thought, that this issue of what are the complex configurations of groups, of organizations and people that we need to be working with as we think about the future of children, the future of the education, the future of the planet, the future of all of our well-being. And I really liked, again, the colleague from Chile, the concept of well-being that was put forward. So thank you for that question. I just wanted to comment on the issue of the terms and issues of confusion, and I think it's a very critical issue, and I try to raise it in my talk. I think we have to find a way of not perpetuating that problem. We don't really have a lot of time, I think, to be spending, defining and redefining and trying to say this is better than that, and we can't. We must really get to what are the core issues, what are the core messages, and I think our big institutions like UNESCO must help us to do that. They mustn't take us down a lot of pathways that we then have to keep on trying to catch up with, into the academic systems and into the school systems and into the stakeholder systems. So I'm not really sure how this needs to be dealt with, but I think it is an issue we need to deal with. And maybe UNESCO can speak to that a bit.
Thank you. And Lydia, I
need to ask you to be quite short, because otherwise we'll never have lunch. That's important.
Not just only spiritual food, right? Talking about stakeholders, though, I'd just like to say that I think it connects an important statement that Doreen made about global citizenship for whom. And who are the stakeholders also in terms of who are getting the benefits. And we have to not lose sight of what, and that is also the conceptual discussion of what is global citizenship for whom. And I think it's obvious in the presentation that the wins are very different in the needs. Because I wouldn't want us, and this is something we are hearing, that we see, we are hearing that global citizenship is a luxury in some situations where it is basic reading, writing, and numeracy. Like you can't start worrying about those. But how is that improving learning today? I thought I tried to make the case in why it is improving learning, but there is still a stronger case that needs to be built when there are such sort of extreme situations that you sort of aptly described, and I think I would like to see more of that thinking. Now, in terms of the conceptual issue, I can only repeat what I said, that for us, principally, that we do not want to get into it. And it's a legitimate question. I think but we don't want to get lost and spend time in semantics and defining concept. What we are trying to look at are those competencies. And I cut my presentation short, but I could have gone on for another 10 minutes. We have very concretely defined in this publication that builds on 2 technical working groups meetings that I think many of you have participated in, one in Seoul and in Bangkok, where we've defined very clearly what are those skills and competencies that are needed or expected out of what comes out of a nebulous group of global citizenship educations, and all those forms of education that are part of the family of global citizenship education. And all that is contributing to build a series of competencies and skills, and that's what matters. And that is defined in there. Right now we have 8 or 9 skills. I'll quick my presentation, but it's in here, defining concretely critical thinking, communication, empathy, soft skills. Now, label it as you wish, and there are many different frameworks that may be out there that give substance to that and operationalize that. And diversity is a reflection of those contexts. But I don't think it's necessary to spend, as you just said, too much time on that. I would really like to focus on those competency skills and transformations that result from global citizenship education.
Thank you, Lydia. And the last words, for Abby, they will be very short.
So, to make it short, yes, it is a problem that skills and values and attitudes are not measured as much as reading and numeracy, if I understood the question right. Second, that the surveys like the one that it sounded like you're doing are incredibly important. to help build the knowledge base on how to measure, especially if it's tested in more than one country. It's like the tadpole in the life cycle of the indicator frog. So it just becomes a very important step.
Thank you very, very much as the last word. Before I give the words to Martin, who has some practical things before our lunch, I'd like to thank everybody, and I'd like to do it in this way. I'd like to say thank you to Fiji, to Chile, to Vietnam, and was it Uganda, Doreen? And I'll say something which always happens when you're in Africa, so I'll say thank you to Europe. Because people always have, and then they say Africa, so I'll do the same, and I will say thank you to South Africa, but I'll put myself in just Europe, that's normally how we talk. So, but thank you very, very much to all of your very, very interesting presentation and sharing it with us, and I'll give the words to Morten.